Where earth and sky meet in dust and fire, ancient Sumer was drawn by the first strokes of humanity. There, people did not yet know the wheel, but they did know how to worship the gods in verse. And it was there that a story began, not with a name but with silence. Her name is not remembered. No inscriptions record it. No priest chant it. Only word of mouth among the mill women at night. She was a priestess of Inanna, goddess of love, war, sky, and rebellion. As a priestess, she was chosen by the gods, but also unhuman, unlovable, untouchable, unborn. And then she became pregnant. No one knew who the father was, a god? A criminal? Or just a stray wind that wandered into the shrine. She did not speak. She did not cry. On starry nights, she touched her belly and whispered to the child in a language no one understood. The day the child was born, mist fell from the purple stars. Eridu was silent. There was no birth ceremony, no laughter or tears, only the ragged breathing and trembling hands of a mother who knew she would not be able to keep her child. In the darkness of a bank of the Euphrates, she held her child for the last time. A basket woven from reeds, sealed with tar, looked like a cradle of destiny. She placed the child in it and kissed its forehead. No tears. No prayers. Just a whisper. If you are born to be king, the river will open a path. If not, float gently away. The basket drifted. The river did not answer. She disappeared. No one saw her again. From then on, people called her the Nameless Mother, the one who dared to give birth to an empire without permission. The basket floated away. Not in a hurry, not in a fear. It glided on the water as if it knew the river had no choice. Euphrates said nothing. It did what it always did, carrying, swallowing, and sometimes giving back. The little reed basket carried a nameless being. A child, newly born into this world, abandoned by love, by human laws, by the gods. In the sky, the stars remained silent. Not a single star fell. No omen appeared. Everything passed as quietly as the child's first breath. A breath that was weak, but persistent like the underground currents deep under the sand. Someone might ask, why is the river not angry? Why does it not sink the basket as it has swallowed the ships of warriors and merchants? But who can guess the will of a river older than all dynasties? As the first rays of sunlight pierced the morning mist, the basket stopped at a shallow spot where the water was ankle-deep. The early wind blew through the reeds, carrying the pungent smell of wet mud and the faint cries of birds. There, a man was bending over to carry water. His name was Aki, a water drawer, the lowest class in Sumerian society. He lived alone, without wife, children, or relatives, with only his old donkey and 2 earthenware pots. Aki was not a dreamer, but last night he had had a strange dream. In his dream he saw a star fall from the sky and sink into the Euphrates. The star was not bright, but warm and quiet, like the heart of a child who had not yet learned to fear. The dream had not yet faded when he saw the basket caught in the reeds. He approached. Inside was a boy. Not crying. Not moving. Its eyes opened wide and looked straight at him, not with fear but with curiosity. Aki sank down, his heart pounding like a magic drum. He didn't know why, but he didn't find himself looking at a child. He found himself looking at a question. A thread connecting the sky to the ground. He held the child close to his chest and whispered, "From now on you are my son. Your name will be Sargon. For though you came from the river, your eyes are not those of a common man." And so, the child born from the river, motherless, fatherless, without lineage, was held in the arms of a water drawer. No one knew that this was the first morning of an empire that had no name. Aki lived on the edge of Kish, where people like him, hauling water, carrying earth, building embankments, were considered the shadow of civilization. He had no family. No one asked his name when they called him, just the water carrier. But since the day he brought the child home, his earthen house seemed to have light. Although the thatched roof still leaked, the wind still whistled through the mud walls, something in his heart had changed. He named the child Sargon, which means the righteous king. No one understood why he chose that name for an orphan. When the neighbors asked, he just smiled. His name was already there when I saw his eyes. I just repeated it. Sargon grew up with the hands of a poor man, with river water carried from early morning, with millet porridge mixed with dust, with stories told by lamps made from sheep fat. But that child was not like ordinary children. When it first learned to sit, it looked at the sky longer than at the ground. When it learned to talk, it asked, "Who made the moon?" before asking, "Who are my parents?" And when it learned to walk, it was not afraid of the dark. It was afraid of silence. One night, Aki woke up to a very soft laugh ringing in his ears. He found himself dreaming, but this dream was brighter than any he had ever had. In the sky the stars were spinning. One fell, took the form of a man, walked up to him and said, "You are not his father. But you were the first to believe that he could be king. Therefore, his blood will remember you." Aki woke up, cold sweat running down his back. Baby Sargon was still sleeping beside him, clutching the edge of his shirt, as if he knew the dream was real. When Sargon was 7, Aki taught him how to carry water. The boy was smaller than his peers, but he was quicker, quieter, and his eyes always seemed to be looking at something that the adults could not see. Once, while passing by the temple of Ishtar, Sargon asked, "Why do the gods live only in temples and not in rivers?" Aki did not know the answer. He simply said, "Because people fear water more than they fear gods." Sargon nodded, then remained silent. But that day when he returned, he drew with charcoal on the wall of his house a figure wearing a crown standing in the river. It was the first time a child's dream had been drawn by hand, not by someone else but by his own. The villagers began to notice. They did not like Sargon's gaze, not because it was fierce, but because it made them feel that they were being watched. A child without parents, without a name, had something in his eyes that was greater than the line between man and God. Some whispered, "He is a bad omen." Others said, "Is he the son of Inanna or the son of the devil?" Aki heard it all. But he was not afraid. He only answered by squeezing Sargon's hand as he passed through the crowd. "You don't have to be like them. You just have to be like yourself." Sargon did not answer. But in his heart he asked, "Like yourself? Who do you mean like?" At 13, Sargon was as tall as Aki, and his eyes were no longer those of a child. They were like two black wells in the desert, deep and reflecting things that adults did not want to see. Kish was bright but uneasy then. The city of brick walls, bronze gates, and temples rose up in the sun like a challenge to the gods. On top of the ziggurat, priests still burned incense and prayed every day, but the people at the foot of the tower believed only in silver and wheat. One afternoon, Sargon went to fetch water with Aki. The wind was blowing. Sand from the western desert mixed with the air, blurring the landscape. As he walked on the mudflats by the Euphrates, he heard the wind whistling through the reeds. But in that whistling, there was something like a whisper. At first he thought it was the sound of water, but when he stopped and listened carefully, each faint syllable appeared as if engraved in his brain. "He who has no father will become the father of many dynasties. He who has no mother will make this land call him father." Sargon was startled, dropping his water bucket into the mud. Aki turned back. "Sargon, what are you doing?" He was silent. In his head echoed a sound that only he could hear. The wind blew hard again, making the reeds bend down as if bowing to something no one could see. That night, Sargon could not sleep. He left the house, sat by the river bank and looked at the new moon. The water flowed quietly without ripples. He picked up a pebble, threw it down and whispered, "If you really hear me, tell me, who am I?" The wind blew gently. No one answered. But in that moment he felt something strange, as if the sky and the earth were both listening. A few weeks later, rumors began to spread. In the village, people said they saw the water-carrying boy standing alone in the middle of an open field, the wind blowing around him without the grass falling. Some said that the wind through their roofs called Sargon's name one moonlit night. The old women shook their heads. "That child is not human." Aki heard, but he remained silent. In his heart, he knew that one day the wind would carry Sargon away, as it had carried the reed basket into his life. The city of Kish loomed in the dusty morning, its dark red brick walls reflecting the fiery sunlight. This was the center of power in Sumer, where the kings proclaimed themselves kings of all nations. The people of Aki always looked at Kish with a mixture of fear and longing. There was gold, barley beer, festivals, and also shiny bronze war chariots. The day Sargon followed Aki into Kish, he was 15 years old. His steps were timid, but his eyes silently swept over everything, from the shops filled with bronze jewelry, to the groups of slaves carrying terracotta, to the warriors in leather jackets, holding bronze axes, standing guard at the city gate. The Kish gate was so tall that it swallowed the sky. At the top, the bronze figure of the goddess Inanna shone in the sunlight. Sargon looked up for a long time. He whispered to himself, "If you are really my mother, have I returned home today?" Aki led Sargon into the market. The smell of barley, baked earth, sheep fat, and human sweat mingled into a heady aroma of life. The cries of the vendors mingled with the trumpets of the priests signaling the worship of the gods. As they passed through the main square, they stopped before the statue of the reigning king. It was Uaru Nimjana, the king known for his sharp eyes and iron fist. Sargon looked at the statue, and a strange feeling arose in his heart, not fear nor exactly admiration. Rather, challenge. He felt a breeze brush past his ear as thin as a whisper. One day your feet will stand on that step. He shivered and turned to look at Aki. He was still haggling over the barley water, not hearing anything. In the afternoon they passed the palace. Outside were rows of guards and bronze-clad war chariots, their wheels glinting in the sun. Sargon stood still for a long time, his eyes filled with a world that was strange yet terrifyingly familiar. He did not know which way he would go, but in his chest his heart beat as if it were beating to a song that had never been sung. It was for the first time that Sargon understood that the world of kings was not so far away from him. That night, when he returned to his village, he stood on the banks of the Euphrates, watching the moonlight reflected on the water, and whispered, "Someday the river will bring me back here, but not to carry water." The years as a waterman passed slowly, but a seed had sprouted in Sargon's heart. He was no longer just a child watching Kish from afar. He began to enter the city every week, carrying water for the priests and soldiers in the palace. It was during those lonely days that Sargon learned more than anyone could have taught him. He knew the secret passages of Kish, when the guards changed shifts, how much water the palace kitchen used each day. He learned to read eyes to guess who was loyal and who was afraid. One night as he stopped by the wall to rest, the wind blew again. "The mud raised you. But the throne is also made of mud." He touched the brick wall, feeling its roughness. In his eyes, Kish was no longer an impregnable fortress, but something that could be conquered. When Sargon turned 18, an incident occurred. King Uar-Nimjina began to suspect his officials and priests. Those suspected of treason were dragged out into the square, tied to wooden posts, and left to starve in the sun. Sargon witnessed it all as he went to fetch water. He did not cry nor did he turn away. In his heart, fear had turned into determination. One day a young official saw him and asked, "You water drawer, why don't you tremble?" Sargon looked straight at him and replied, "Because the wind never trembles before dust." The word spread among the slaves. They began to look at Sargon differently. A man born from the mud, without father or mother, but with the sky in his eyes. Rumors about the strange young man reached the ears of those who were dissatisfied with the court. One night, when the moon was hidden behind the clouds, a mysterious man appeared on the banks of the Euphrates, where Sargon often sat. He wore a black cloak and his voice was deep. "You do not belong to the mud. We can give you what you seek, if you dare to step out of the darkness." Sargon looked at the water. The wind blew. In the sound of the wind, he heard a distant lullaby, perhaps from some nameless mother, still watching from across the river. That night, Sargon did not return to Aki's house. He followed the man into the darkness of Kish. His footsteps left the mud of the water drawers, and entered the path that would lead him to the throne of all Sumer. The night Sargon entered the darkness of Kish was also the night the mud was shed from the shoulders of a water drawer, to open the path of a future king. The man in the black cloak led him through narrow alleys, where oil lamps flickered on the brick walls. The smell of barley wine, sweat, and dust mingled into the scent of the sleeping city. They came to an underground cellar. There a dozen men gathered around an oil lamp. They were all those who were unhappy with King Uar-Nimjina. Merchants whose goods had been robbed, soldiers who had been starved, runaway slaves, and a few former nobles who had lost their power. Their eyes stopped on Sargon, a thin young man in rough clothes, but with a fire in his eyes that none of them had. One asked, "What do you want, son of mud?" Sargon did not blink. "I want Kish." And then everything the Euphrates flows through. The words echoed like the wind in the dark cellar. No one laughed. They looked at each other, and in their eyes the seed of an empire sprouted. In the months that followed, Sargon lived two lives. By day he continued to be the water carrier for the palace. By night, he learned to wield a dagger, to read a map of the city, and to whisper to those who thirsted for freedom. He learned that power lies not in hammers or axes but in fear and faith. When a slave believes that tomorrow he will be free, he is stronger than a guard. When a guard fears that he will die in his sleep, he is no better than a coward. Sargon learned to sow both. On the last night before the uprising, he went to the banks of the Euphrates, where his cradle had been. He knelt down and dipped his hands in the water. For the first time he whispered to his nameless mother, "I am going. If you have truly sent me into this world, let the wind open the way." A gentle breeze swept across the water, making ripples tremble under the moon. Sargon knew that tomorrow night would be the night of fate. The uprising was silent but ruthless. A band of soldiers loyal to Sargon opened the city gates from within. In the darkness, the former slaves rushed into the palace like ghosts. Before dawn, the flag of Uru-Nimjana was torn down, and Sargon sat on his first throne, a throne still covered with the mud of his feet pulling the water. The people of Kish awoke in fear and amazement. A name was heard for the first time but would echo forever in history. Sargon, the Mud King. When dawn broke over Kish, the muddy throne had a new owner. Sargon, who had been born without a father or mother, who had carried water through muddy alleys, now sat where gods and men bowed. But Kish was only the beginning. The neighboring cities were shaken by the news. In Lagash Uruk, the old kings sat on their thrones, hearing Sargon's name whispered in the wind. They called him the rebel, son of the devil, but deep down they knew a wolf had stepped out of the darkness. Sargon had no noble blood, but he understood the people better than any king before him. The slaves who had been water carriers, earth carriers, now clad in leather armor, wielding bronze axes, followed him like a dream written in the wind. They advanced towards other cities. Lagash closed its gates, but when the wind rose one rainy night, the gates opened from the inside. Uruk, which had once been proud of Gilgamesh, watched the army from Kish approach and bowed without resistance. Sargon did not massacre. He entered each city like a returning son, asking only that they call him King of Sumer. After subduing the Sumerian cities, Sargon decided to build a new capital, one that did not belong to any of the old clans. He named it Akkad, the city of water, wind, and the echoes of history. On the riverbank, where mud still clung to his feet, Sargon pointed far away. Here we will build a city that even the gods will look down upon. The people who had bowed before all now built their own walls. Each brick baked in the sun carried the smell of earth and sweat. Each road stretched out like a vein leading to the heart of the future empire. One night, when Akkad was still an unfinished wall, Sargon walked along the banks of the Euphrates. He heard the wind. It was no longer the whisper of childhood, but the loud cry of 1,000 people. You are no longer a son of mud. You are Sargon the Great, the first one whom earth and water have chosen to rewrite history. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he seemed to see his nameless mother standing in the mist, nodding slightly. Thus the Akkadian Empire was born. The first empire in human history, born from mud, wind, and the dream of an abandoned child in a reed basket. In his later years, Sargon the Great was no longer the skinny young man who had carried water in the city of Kish. He had become the shadow of an empire. Wherever the Euphrates and Tigris flowed, Sargon's name was heard. But in his heart, the wind was the same as it had been on the first day, whispering, lonely, never fully answering. Old age slowed Sargon's pace. He rarely appeared before his soldiers, but sat by the high windows of the palace of Akkad, looking down at the silent river. Some afternoons he went to the banks of the Euphrates alone without soldiers. The people saw him and bowed their heads, but in his eyes there was no longer the light of a conqueror, only the gaze of a child looking for its mother. One evening he called for the scribe who wrote the tablets. I do not need a monument to victory, he said, write what I really am. The scribe's hand trembled, but he carved the words into the wet earth. I am Sargon, son of the river, who knows not who his parents are. I was carried by the water, raised by the wind, and became king of the four directions. But in the end I am still just a child floating on the river. Sargon's last night came in silence. He left the palace, leaning on his stick, and walked to the banks of the Euphrates. The full moon shone on the water, the reeds shook slightly, the wind whispered like the first day the reed basket drifted away. He knelt down, touched the river. For a moment he thought he saw his nameless mother step out of the mist, faceless, but her warm hand placed on his head. The lullaby of the past, which he had only heard in his dreams, now sounded so close. He smiled. And like the reed basket of years ago, his soul drifted with the water, returning to the earth, to the wind, and to his mother. The next morning the Akkadians found the king's staff stuck in the river, the water still flowing quietly. On his desk, there was only a dry clay tablet, inscribed with shaky words that posterity would remember forever. My empire will fall. The wind will carry sand to cover all its walls. But the story of the child who floated down the river will never disappear. Many years after Sargon's death, the Akkadian Empire began to crumble. The once mighty brick walls that stood tall in the desert sun now cracked under the rain and the passage of time. People still spoke of his name, but no one knew where he had disappeared to, only that the Euphrates continued to flow, as if it had never stopped to weep for a king. When caravans passed through old Akkad, they heard only the wind blowing through the abandoned city gates. The wind sometimes sounded like a child's laughter, sometimes like a sad lullaby. Sumerian mothers told their children, "If you hear the wind singing by the river, know that it is King Sargon looking for his mother." Thus the legend lived on in the breath of the earth and sky, no longer needing stone tablets or clay tablets to survive. One moonlit night, an old ferryman swore he saw a reed basket floating on the water, but as he approached it, it vanished into the mist. It was believed to be the spirit of Sargon, returning to where he had started, continuing his journey without glory, only with his lullaby. For deep down, all kings are just children, searching for the bracelet they lost on their first day. For generations, poets and storytellers have repeated this legend. But the lullaby of the nameless mother gradually became the sound of the wind, and only the Euphrates remembered. On very quiet nights, when the water is as smooth as a mirror, if one listens carefully, one can hear the lullaby from afar. Sleep, child of the river. One day the earth and the wind will call your name. But I am still here, in the vapor, in the mist, in the song of the night. And so, the story of King Sargon and the nameless mother ends not with the sound of drums or swords, but with the sound of wind and lullaby, to be immortalized in the silence of time.